are looking at Aramean people. Aramean, one of a confederacy of tribes that spoke a North Semitic language, Aramaic, and between the 11th and the 8th century BC occupied Aram, a large region in northern Syria. In the same period, some of these tribes seized large tracts of Mesopotamia. Um, in the Old Testament, the Arameans are represented as being closely akin to the Hebrews and living in northern Syria around Haran from about the 16th century BC. The Arameans are also mentioned often in Assyrian records as freebooters. The first mention of the Arameans occurs in inscriptions of the Assyrian king, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Tiglath-Pileser I. By the end of the 11th century BC, the Arameans had formed the state of Bit Adini on both sides of the Euphrates River below Carchemish. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly either. And they held areas in Anatolia and northern Syria and in the anti-Lebanon area, including Damascus. About 1030 BC, a coalition of the southern Arameans, led by Hadadezer, king of Zobah, in league with the Ammonites, Edomites, and the Arameans of Mesopotamia, attacked Israel, but was defeated by King David. To the east, however, the Aramean tribes spread into Babylonia, where an Aramean usurper was crowned king of Babylon under the name of Adad-apal-Iddin. Pronunciation, I don't know, probably not correct. By the 9th century, the whole area from Babylon to the Mediterranean coast was in the hands of the Aramean tribes, known collectively as Kaldu or Kashdu, the biblical Chaldeans. I want you to remember some of these things here. Assyria, nearly encircled, took the offensive, and in 853 the Assyrian king Shalmaneser III fought a battle at Karkar against the armies of Hamath, Aram, Phoenicia, and Israel. This battle was indecisive, but in 838 Shalmaneser was able to annex the area held by the tribes of the modern Euphrates, on the middle Euphrates. Between Israel and Damascus, intermittent wars occurred until Tiglath-Pileser III of Assyria captured Arpad, the center of Aramean resistance in northern Syria, in 740 BC. He overthrew Samaria in 734 and Damascus in 732. Finally, the destruction of Hamath by Sargon II of Assyria in 720 marked the end of the Aramean kingdoms of the west. Arameans along the lower Tigris River maintained their independence longer. In 626, a Chaldean general, Nabopolassar, proclaimed himself king of Babylon and joined with the Medes and Scythians to overthrow Assyria. In the New Babylon or Chaldean Empire, Chaldeans, Arameans, and Babylonians became largely indistinguishable. And there's more to it. So why are we reading this? What does this have to do with the previous topic? Well, we're going to show you in just a moment here. So we're going to go to Deuteronomy chapter 26. And it says in here, verse number 1. This is basically the offerings of the first fruits and the tithes. And it shall be, when thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance, and possess it, and dwellest therein, that thou shalt take of the first of all the fruit of the earth, which thou shalt bring of thy land, that the Lord, which in Hebrew is the four letters Yud, He, Vav, He, which we're not quite certain how it was pronounced, but we do know it is the third person form of the Hebrew verb to be, which is Hayah. Anyhow, we're going to keep going here. Says, thou shalt put it in a basket, and thou shalt go into the place which the Lord thy God shall choose to place his name there. And thou shalt go unto the priest that shall be in those days, and say unto him, I profess this day unto the Lord thy God, that I am come into the country which the Lord sware unto our fathers for to give us. And the priest shall take the basket out of thine hand, and set it down before the altar of the Lord thy God. And thou shalt speak and say, before the Lord thy God, a Syrian ready to perish was my father, and he went down into Egypt and sojourned there with a few, and became there a nation, great, mighty, and populous. And the Egyptians evil entreated us and afflicted us and laid upon us hard bondage. And when we cried unto the Lord God of our fathers, the Lord heard our voice and looked on our affliction and our labor and our oppression. And the Lord brought us forth out of Egypt with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm and with great terribleness and with signs and with wonders. And he hath brought us unto this place and hath given us this land, even a land that floweth with milk and honey. And it goes on. So this is the law or the offerings of first fruits and tithes. This is the law concerning that. This was the proclamation in verse 5, of what, starting at verse 5, of what they were supposed to say whenever they brought this. It was a reminder to them. Now, the King James Version uses the term Assyrian, which is in existence at the time that the translation came about. But we're going to go here, and we're going to get the Hebrew word here. So it's verse 5, Assyrian. And the actual word is Arami. Arami. Aramite or Aramean. So, Aramean. So who is this? Our father was a Syrian ready to perish. Well, this is really referring to Jacob. Jacob and his children, the children of Israel. They went down into Egypt. This is after Joseph was already there, but they went down there and sojourned there in Egypt, and then they were there and then became enslaved while down there in Egypt after the death of Joseph and so forth. I believe after the death of Joseph. Let's go to Genesis. Let's go back here. Let's go. I did not prepare for this. Sacrifice of Isaac, Sarah, Isaac and Rebecca. Let's start here. Isaac and Rebecca. All right. So what we have here is the story of Abraham sending his servant to seek out for a wife for Isaac. Okay. So this is where this is happening here. Genesis 24:1. And Abraham was old and well stricken in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said unto his eldest servant of his house, that ruled over all that he had, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh, and I will make thee swear by Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, which is the 4 letters, or the Tetragrammaton, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, and thou shalt take a wife unto my son. Thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but thou shalt go unto my country, to my kindred, and take a wife unto my son Isaac. Country and his kindred. Do we all know what kindred means? Correct? We know what that means. Shouldn't have to explain that one. And the servant said unto him, peradventure, or perhaps is what that means, the woman will not be willing to follow me unto this land. Must I needs bring thy son again unto the land from whence thou camest, the land from where you came? And Abraham said unto him, beware that thou bring not my son thither again. The Lord God of heaven, which took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, which spake unto me, and that swear unto me, saying, unto thy seed I will give this land. He shall send the angel before thee, and thou shalt take a wife unto my son from thence. So then we get into the story of Rebecca, and I believe she's drawing water. Yes, we get for Abraham's servant. And we get to the part here. Let's see here. Rebecca had a brother. So verse 29. Rebecca had a brother, and his name was Laban. And Laban ran out unto the man unto the well. And it came to pass, when he saw the earring and bracelets upon his sister's hands, when he had heard the words of Rebekah his sister, saying, thus spake the man unto me, that he came unto the man, and behold, he stood by the camels at the well. And he said, come in, thou blessed of the Lord, wherefore standest thou without? And I prepared the house and room with thy camels. And the man came into the house and girded his camels and gave straw, and so forth, so forth, so forth. So we have kinsmen of Abraham. We have Rebekah and her brother Laban. Okay. All right. I don't know if it's still in this chapter. Tell you what, we're going to go. Where's our search here? Let's try F3. No, that doesn't work. Okay. So where's our search feature? Here we go. Let's look up the name, because I know it will come up if I type in Laban. Okay. Genesis 25:20. Let's get King James with the Strong's Concordance. So, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padan Aram, which is that is actually Padam Aram. So it's Padam and then Aram, Aram. So here we have this word Syrian again, which is Arami. So we have Laban the Aramean. Now, why is it translating this? Because Aram was a large region in northern Syria. So ancient Aram was in this area, which in modern times we call Syria. So let's just Google that. All right, let's see if we can get images of Aram. Yeah, that's not a very good image here. So here's Aram, Damascus. We all know Damascus currently is in Syria. So yeah, this is where Paul had his Damascus Road experience. But yeah, Syria, this Middle Eastern country here. And this is what Aram and the Arameans from that land. So Laban, or Rebekah, was the daughter of Bethuel, who was a Syrian. But remember, Rebekah is kin to Abraham, because Abraham sent his servant to go get a bride for Isaac from his kindred and his country. So here we see it, Padan Aram, the field of Aram, Padan, the flat or flatland of Aram. Okay. And Aramean is like a sister. The language that they spoke, Aramean, Aramaic, is a sister language of Hebrew. Now, some say that Aramaic did not exist at this time of Abraham, or, well, not necessarily Abraham. But let's see here. Let me just search with the Bible app real quick here. Okay. Um, was it Jacob who called it, or was it Laban who called this land? I'm trying to remember. There is a passage. Here we go. Laban called this place Jagar Shadutha. Now this, but Jacob called it Gilead. So this actually, it's not pulling it up, is an Aramaic word. If I recall correctly. Check out Aramaic name used by Laban to describe a heap of stones set up by him and Jacob, who called it Gilead. When Jacob, okay, let's see here. Now the covenant is making. Laban has been referred to as an Aramean, and his name for the place is Aramaic, Jagar Sahadutha. Jacob, however, calls it Galid in Hebrew. Both names mean cairn of stones or cairn of whatever that means. I don't know what this word means particularly. But Jacob calls it in its Hebrew name, but Laban calls it in the Aramaic language. So Aramaic did exist at this time. But they're like sister languages in most cases, although there's a big difference there. But let's go back to Laban because he is called a Syrian. So if Laban is a Syrian or an Aramean, what does that make his sister? She's apparently the same thing. Of course, unless they have different parents and she wasn't full blooded or something of that nature. But that's not likely in this particular case because of how closely they dwelt together. So Rebecca, this becomes the mother of Jacob and Esau, was of that stock of the Arameans. Their uncle Laban was Aramean. Jacob and Esau obviously had some Aramean in them. And where did Abraham come from? Abraham's from Ur. So his father was Haran. And let's skip up here. Terah's descendants. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran begat Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. And Abram and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, which was his sister. And the name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren, she had no children. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran, his son's son, and so forth and so forth. They went forth from them from Ur of the Chaldees. Okay, let's look up this one. Occasionally shown as the second form from enclitic meaning towards the Kasdites. Remember we looked this up here and they talked about this. Kashdu, Chaldeans. By the 9th century, the whole area from Babylon to Mediterranean coast was in the hands of the Aramean tribes, known collectively as Kaldu or Kashdu, the biblical Chaldeans. Kashdite, or descendant of Kesed, by implication a Chaldean. So when you're looking at this, these are actually originally in their origins. These are Middle Eastern tribes of people. Middle Eastern tribes, Middle Eastern. So when we go to back to Deuteronomy chapter 26 and verse 5, their reminder was that their father, who was a Aramean, was ready to perish. This is just a reminder of what their roots are. Now, the Torah had made sure that this scripture was put in here, possibly because later groups would say, hey, we're original Jews, we're the original children of Israel. Well, what is your connection to the Arameans? Can you prove your connection to the Arameans and the Chaldeans? What is your connection to them? How are you going to prove that? Because the Torah has this in it. And we've read in Genesis their origins and things of that nature. How are we going to prove that? That's why it's important to read the scriptures and glean a lot from them. Not just surface reading, but study and getting into the Torah. So let's go here. Back to my website, studying from them. What is a Jew? I brought this scripture up before. Is God the God of the Jewish people only? Is he not also God of the Gentiles, just of the Gentiles also? I brought that up in the first video, or the first podcast. The text mentions Jews and Gentiles. It doesn't mention Benjamites or Reubenites, for example. It's because the term Jew in the first century is interchangeable with the term Israelite. I want to establish a definition of the term first, just so that while reading this, we happen to be on the same page of understanding. First of all, I'm not reducing this term in this article to what we know from the first article called a remnant Jew. We're talking about all Jews, not just the remnant that is saved. We are going to look at the origins of the Jewish people, the children of Israel, the offspring of Jacob, the offspring of all 12 children of Jacob, the physical descendants of Jacob, Israel. There's another definition of Jew, and that refers to being halachically, i.e. legally Jewish. The proselyte is someone who is not Jewish by birth, but Jewish by conversion, and they legally become a Jew. This is what a proselyte is. They would be considered halachically Jewish. And the scriptures I quote are Exodus 12:43-49, which we went on in the first podcast. Esther 8:17. We also did. We can look at Acts 2:10, Acts 6:5, Matthew chapter 23, verse 15, as well as the rabbinic interpretation of Genesis 12:5, where it says that Abraham had all the souls that they had gotten, him and Sarah had gotten, or literally the term in Hebrew says all of the souls that they had made. The Hebrew says, and I'm not going to try to pronounce that. It literally says the souls that they had made. The question is, what does made mean? Assuming that Abraham and Sarah were not proto-Frankensteins who made souls, it seems to imply that these people had some sort of deeper connection to Abraham and Sarah. Traditional Jewish commentaries see them as people who Abraham and Sarah had converted to their belief in the one true God. So we read this. This is the Tree of Life version, who renders it actually in the ancient term Aramean rather than the more modern Syrian. Okay. What's interesting about this passage is that we are told exactly what Yaakov, who was later named Israel, was. He's called a wandering Aramean. So we dealt over that. Okay. Abraham, or Abram, as he was known at this time up through the 13th chapter of Genesis, was not referred to as a Hebrew. We know he is a Shemite, a descendant of Shem, and in modern English we say the Semite. Abraham's father was not referred to as a Hebrew either. In fact, it was not until chapter 14 of Genesis that Abraham is referred to as a Hebrew. In fact, Abraham was the first Hebrew. He received the call from God in Genesis chapter 12 to leave his father's house, his people, and the land that they lived in. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 4. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country. Actually, this should be all caps instead of just a capital L. It should be all caps because it represents here the tetragrammaton. All right, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So Abram departed as, and it should be the tetragrammaton again, as Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh had spoken unto him. And Lot went in with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. So here's Ur of the Chaldeans, where he's from. Haran. Here's the land of Canaan. Shechem, Bethel, Jerusalem, etc., etc. So this is where Abraham is from. Abraham was called the first Hebrew, which was an obvious connection to Abraham's crossing over the Euphrates River. He crossed it. Here we go. Crossing the Euphrates a couple of times to search for the land God was promising to give him. The root letters convey the meaning of crossed over or passed through. Abraham was the only one of his time who believed in one God and was faithful enough to obey the voice of that one God by searching for the land that he was promised. And he believed in Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, and he counted it to him for righteousness. So this should be the tetragrammaton there, and it should be all capitalized since we're using Lord as a euphemism, as a they say less offensive. I guess it's offensive for some people to say the name of God. To me, I don't think it's offensive. But they use a euphemism, a word, a way of saying or referring to God without actually saying his name. One of the reasons is we no longer actually know fully how that name is pronounced. Okay. Origin of the term Hebrew. The term Hebrew comes from the Aramaic word Abar or Habar, which means to cross over. This name was given to the Hebrew people simply because Abraham and the people who were with him crossed the river Euphrates and went into Canaan. Origin of the term Hebrew. Therefore, they were known by those who lived east of the river Euphrates as Hebrew, that is, the people across the river. All branches of the great Semitic people had a common speech. Now take some time. Okay, we read Deuteronomy 26:5. You can read Genesis 31, verse 20 and verse 24, Genesis chapter 25 and verse 20, Genesis chapter 11 and verse 28. Get yourself a good understanding of the origins of the Jewish people, which according to the Bible appears to show a Semitic origin, one connected to the ancient Aramean and Chaldean peoples. Here's some food for thought. About half of the book of Daniel, the prophet, is written in Aramaic, and certain words that Jesus spoke in the Gospels were recorded in Aramaic. I believe it's from having some Aramean origins. Aramaic language is closely related to the Hebrew language. They're like sister languages. Abraham's name prior to the name change that God gave him was Abram. It is related to the meaning of Aramean. Abram meant high or exalted father. From the Hebrew Ab, Aleph Beit, father, and Resh Mem, ram or rum, elevated. Aramean means of the elevation, highly. From the verb ram. So here's the same letters and vowel pointing to be high. So Abram, his original name, is closely related to what Aramean means. And we have some links here about Bible history. If you visit the website, it is on WordPress. It's called Studying at the Feet of the Master. So we have Egyptian depictions of Hebrew slaves considered reliable to the point of caricature. You can see some with blonde or red hair. They appear to be of a brown color and not black in this picture. But there may be other hieroglyphics that show some dark-skinned Israelites, which I do believe is due to intermarriage while in Egypt prior to becoming slaves. Also, Egypt got slaves elsewhere. They didn't just have Hebrew slaves. From south of Egypt among Cush and other Egyptians as well. The point is, if the Hebrews were just black like the Hamites, then how do we get the brown-hued Israelites? To me, this points toward what we learned, that they were originally Chaldean or Aramean and gathered wives where they could. Remember, this was before the Torah of Moses, which gave guidelines on marriage. We'll see in the next article how there was permission from God for Israel, after giving the Torah of Moses, to marry outside of the nation under certain parameters. There's a note here about some viewing that the wandering Aramean was Abraham himself, but that's more according to rabbinic tradition that I don't really get into. Not a view that I hold. All right, so we're going to end this here. We will end this here. I think it's a good place to stop. And then the next one, we'll get a little bit further into this and maybe possibly wrap up this topic. There's 4 installments, and we're on number 2, but we might do 3 and 4 together if all things work well.